Gina Din Kariuki is a renowned Kenyan business leader, strategic communications expert, and PR authority. In a milestone move, she launched her latest book, Beyond the Ballot. The book's relevance not only to governance, but to diplomacy, crisis management, public health, and Africa's positioning on the world stage. Through her books, workshops, and publishing guidance, Gina Din is now encouraging women to courageously write, document their history, experiences, and share it with the world. Her story is next on our weekly segment of Women and Power.
You know, let's get our books out. Let's start documenting. And, you know, it starts out from simply having a journal every day of what you're doing. And before you know it, you have a story, because all of us definitely have a story. And how do we want to be remembered? You know, for me, a lot of it's about legacy. I don't want the work that I've done in the industry that I've spent so much time in to go undocumented. I want people to look back one day and say, oh, you know, Gina Din was able to help shape the conversation of the continent. My name is Gina Din Kariuki. I sit at the intersection of corporate policy, governance, and I've spent over 3 decades now in the PR industry, and so work very closely with media, with government, and with corporates. I built my organization, Gina Din Group, over 27 years after having worked at Barclays Bank for 14. So my business had been acquired, and I was at this stage when I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do. And then COVID happened, and there was suddenly all this time on our hands. And I'd always knew that I'd write one day my autobiography. So Daughter of Africa was setting the foundation of who I am, going back into my history, my family's history. I grew up and was born in Nanyuki. My father was an entrepreneur himself, and he was very much my North Star, and built his business from scratch. And so I very much have modeled my life on what he did. Beyond the Ballot's been a really interesting experience for me, because it's really about, you know, when you look at governments and you look at governance, and I'm, you know, very fascinated by how politics works, not just in Kenya, but right across the continent. And, you know, the amount of work that is done leading up to an election, you know, the amount of money that's spent on an election and all the razzmatazz. And so I was very keen to sort of say, you know, are we really looking at governance based on a one-time event? And surely there should be something after that. So I started thinking about that, and I've worked very closely with many governments right across the continent. And it's something that I've talked about widely, is to say your job actually starts after you're elected, not getting elected, because that's when citizens are going to hold you to account. It's not a criticism, it's an invitation. And it's an invitation for governments to look a little bit deeper into how they're governing, and you know, maybe suggestions in how they could do better. Because I think for me, it's also sparked conversations. And I think that's the whole point of it, is that my book won't solve all the problems, but it'll be a catalyst for a conversation. Conflict, war, I mean, every day it's quite a frightening place to be. And yet, you know, when you look at the Kenya story, we have something that very few countries have right now, and that's peace. You know, yet we don't position ourselves very well when it comes to peace. But yet that's what investors are looking for. That's what tourists are looking for. And yet the Kenyan story never really covers that part. We have elections coming up next year. How do we want to position ourselves, and how can we be trusted? I mean, the book goes into quite a lot about manifestos, because we never hold our politicians to account using that manifesto to say, you promised us this, this, and this, and you actually haven't delivered on it. But we will go ahead and vote again. Politicians promise 1 or 2 or 3 things that they can actually deliver on. I think if that happens, I think everybody will have a much more easy time. Citizens will know what to expect. And I think Africa doesn't really lack progress. I think what we lack is authorship. And for me, that I looked at it and I was really interested in our story, the African story, and the fact that very few Africans were telling that story. So most of our narrative was being told by people that weren't African. And, you know, when you do that, you get a very different viewpoint, or somebody's looking at it from a different lens. We can just say that women are going to have this ministry and that ministry, but if you look in many countries, very many of them are tokens. And I was trying very hard to sort of say, you know, women need to have positions of power, not just to say they're in cabinet. Give them, you know, critical ministries, finance, health, you know, things that really affect the day-to-day lives of our citizens. We've done better, but I'm not sure it's enough. And I really, you know, hope and pray that we will see more women in serious leadership positions. We go into bookshops, and there's so few books written by African women. And so we're not documenting our stories. And yet, right across the continent, it's, you know, it's so important that women are telling their stories. We just don't. And I'm not sure why that is. I'm not sure if it's because we've always been told that we can't, or we should be the silent voices. A little history of all the various things that we have been involved in. And I really hope that by me sort of stepping out there and telling my story, that more women can. Yeah. I think it's also, you know, telling your story in your professional capacity. I mean, I hope more women are, you know, inspired to join the communication sector because of my story, which goes deep into how I got into it. Because all of us can inspire somebody else.